So you decided to make carbon fiber parts for your car and something goes wrong with the mold. That's the topic of today's episode. Okay, so unlike a lot of the other videos on making fiberglass molds to do carbon fiber on YouTube, I just thought I would fill in one very important gap that I seem to be seeing out there. And that is what happens when even after all the planning and all the work that you've put into your mold, and when you pull the plug out, something bad happens. So in today's episode of Throttle Stop Garage, we're going to have a look at how we repair those things. When I first started making molds, just like a lot of you, I watched some YouTube, and I remember distinctly watching this one guy from Australia who will remain nameless. I'm not blaming him. But when he made molds to make parts for his race car, it just looked like he was sort of haphazardly slopping things around, and the molds turned out great every time. So I thought, well, geez, this is easy. I'm gonna have my stab at this. And then the fender molds for me were my Achilles heel. Everything fell apart on the fender molds. They went horribly. I did them both at the same time. Definitely don't do that. And I discovered something important, which is whenever somebody who's 65 years old appears to be doing something haphazardly, it's because he's been doing it for 40 years. And all the details are being attended to. It just doesn't look like it. So that's kind of frustrating for somebody who's just beginning and trying to get this done right. So the fender molds actually turned out terribly. There's all kinds of problems with them. So let's just have a quick look at some of the issues and how I hope to address them in this video. Okay, oftentimes problems with molds happen simply because you haven't used the correct techniques. Now, if we're just learning, which of course I am, who even knows what the correct techniques are? I mean, I've read all the books, I've looked at videos, I've done what I can, but there's a big difference between actually looking at something and doing something to try to get it accomplished. But I have a problem here with this mold. It's right here to the center of the mold. Where else would the problem be? And the gel coat is not being supported in behind by that first layer. In this case, I was using chopped strand matte. So it wasn't supported. So as soon as we try to turn this into a part, all the pieces are just going to blister and fall right out of it. So we need to get those repaired. Then we have other kinds of problems. Actually, all are showing up in this one mold, where things like I've got some rough areas in here that just need to be sanded out, and I'm not too sure what I was thinking with some parts of this. So first up, we're going to fix these things. Now, mostly what I'm worried about here is mechanical locking, right? So if I go to put the carbon fiber products in here, so you get all the different weaves and things, and you go to lay them in, I can't have them mechanically locking into the mold. They need to be able to release from the mold. So most of the parts that you're going to make in your garage, you're not making to pull hundreds of parts from these molds. You're only creating them to probably make a set for you and maybe a set for a buddy, and that's pretty much their entire usefulness. So you'll notice in all of the videos here, I'm not using the orange tooling gel coat. I'm just using a regular white gel coat that I could get at my fiberglass suppliers. It was reasonably cheap, and in most instances I actually did brush it on. Okay, so we're not worried about making hundreds and hundreds of parts out of these molds. Lots of the information that you get from the pros are about making hundreds and hundreds of parts from your molds. We don't need that. So in this instance, a little bit of fiberglass reinforced body filler into these gaps is going to fix our problem. It's more than good enough to get these problems fixed. So let's have a look at how we get that done. Things made. All right, here's the part we're trying to make. This is a reinforcement panel that goes to the back of the fender, and then this part here is going to close up against the body of the car. So it's used to stiffen the fender, right? So the fender actually is going this way, body is going forward, door is opening into here, right? So a pretty typical stiffening panel. This is our critical dimension here, right? We're always trying to note these things on the part, right? To go, okay, which side is which. And in this case, the parts were in pretty rough condition with lots of surface rust, right? It's quite rough, but it's an invisible part, so I didn't really care in the mold, right? So I didn't bother putting Bondo on this or fixing this part ahead of time. I simply primed it, and then I made the mold. Okay, so then the mold, there's the mold for this part. Now, when I pulled the part out of the mold, that's when we found I had a number of problems. Again, beginning mold maker, I basically, again, just like you, I have no idea what I'm doing most of the time, but I'm not scared, so I'll try anything once, or at least I'll give it a go. Anyway, so I had some problems right here where that sharp metal part was coming out, and it actually chipped off the gel coat. Now, it's no really big deal, but I've just used a little bit of lightweight body filler in here to touch some of those areas up. We'll sand those and get them perfected. But what I have learned is, you know, in subsequent molds, I pay special attention to areas like that because I didn't get enough of a curve here to allow that part to release nicely out of the mold. Always be thinking when you're making the mold of ways to get that, how the part's going to come out, especially if it's a steel part. These are completely different technologies, right? Versus, you know, a stamp press steel body panel versus a fiberglass or a carbon fiber body panel have very different requirements for how the tooling would work in order to get them to be released. Again, I'm not too concerned about various areas. You can still see some little bits of rust in here. Now, I've gone ahead and already sanded this up. In fact, I did that must be 3 years ago. So I am going to want to clean the surface of this mold because it's been lying in my garage for a while. We're going to want to sand some of these edges, right, in preparation for taking this mold that's just about junk and turning it into a good mold that we're going to use for this project.
All right, so we're going to begin with the sanding. Oh my God, I can't, my phone won't even recognize my fingerprint anymore, folks. I have no fingerprints left after all the sanding I've been doing lately. Anyways, occasionally I get that finger sander out and don't sand with my own fingers. That does a nice job. Here I'm just letting off that edge, right? Just getting rid of it. It was sharp. Like, what was I thinking? There's no way a part's going to come out of that. So in we go. In this case, we're going to use that short strand body filler that I've used before, the Fiberglass. It's just a little bit more durable than trying to use a lightweight body filler in a place like that. Lightweight body filler is probably going to break out. Now, only making one set, so most likely doesn't matter. But anyway, try to do the best I can. I'm also trying to fill some of these little areas. You can see on the flange I've got some problems there. And those will eventually create air leaks, actually, if you don't get them touched up. So I got those all touched up, and now we're polishing, and we're pretty much ready to go with these molds. Totally happy with how these turned out, actually. These were easy to do. Well, stay tuned. Not so easy's coming right up.
Well, I'm pretty happy with the way these turned out. So again, these are those inner fender parts. Hand polished, as you just saw. The mold surface. Not too worried about that flange area. I'm not going to waste time polishing that. Not necessary. Because it's just going to get tacky tape on it. But you can see here what I've done is I've added in the filler. We fixed a few pinholes. Right? Just little like pinholes that were in the gel coat. So they're all repaired now. And we fixed up some of these other areas where I don't think, well, where we were having delamination problems even with the original part coming out. So there's no way the carbon fiber part's going to come out of there. So okay, so here's the fender mold in all its glory. And I've got any number of problems with it. I've got the following errors were committed. The first one is going to be in areas sort of like in here where how am I actually going to get bagging materials and stuff from this corner to this flange? Like, there's a right angle corner here. This is never going to work. So that's no good. Then some of these sharp corners I've discovered since my other mold making efforts. This isn't going to work either. We need to have a nice smooth transition there that we could have fixed before we made the mold. Various areas here, like this flange is only about 70 millimeters wide, and that's a little tight. Right, little tight. Gets a little wider through the top part of the fender arch. And then right up here at the corner, again, I got to make a turn from here to here, and I didn't know what to do, obviously. So that's a problem. Then you have all kinds of other little errors. Some of them are really hard to see. But let's just have a look down in here. So there's a whole section right here on the fender lip, right, where the gel coat has not adhered to the first layer. In this case, I was using chopped strand mat, and that's why you don't use chopped strand mat in your first layer, because you get these sorts of problems. So that's up and under. Another bit in here, so that's got to get attended to. I'm going to give you a really good demonstration of what one of these little blisters looks like and why we care. Okay, so you can see here, it's pretty obvious that this gel coat is not attached to anything. And the problem was caused by poor technique. No one to blame but myself. So we've got this problem all the way along this edge, and it needs to be repaired. On the bottom side of here, same problem, right? I didn't get that fabric draped in nice and tight because I used chopped strand mat, and I watched other people use chopped strand mat. They seemed to succeed. I epically failed. So that's not going to be any good. Now, what we're going to do with this, again, the main body of the mold, not that you don't ever want to admit defeat, but it happened on both. At least I was consistent. Consistently bad. Both molds are about the same level of no good. Even though there's a lot of fail in these molds, you don't want to throw them out. Each one of these molds costs several $100s to make, and each one of the plugs, so there was a fender part here that I had to recraft, and I did all the body work on it, and like all of the bigger areas in here are actually okay. I mean, I've got one or two little imperfections, but it's mostly out edges, flanges, those sorts of areas, the external parts. So initially when I popped these out of the mold, I mean, aside from the obvious crying that went on, and being really frustrated with going, gee, I watched these other guys do it, how come I can't do it? How come it didn't work? Lack of experience is the reason why it didn't work. If you don't have the skill, you can watch all you like, but it's never going to get a whole lot better. But I don't want to throw the molds out. They're fundamentally sound. They're still stiff. Like the overall mold concept isn't wrong. There's just a lot of touch-ups to do in here. So the debate is always, is it going to take less time to throw the materials out, to buy all new chop strand mat, new fiber, everything, and do it again, or will it actually take less time to get in there and just repair the parts that you need to have repaired? If I was making a production style mold, like if I was planning on going in and producing many of these, I would be going back and fixing these properly, right? I would just recast the mold, redo the flanging, rethink the whole project. But as I'm not making hundreds of these or even tens, just kind of the ones that I need, I'm pretty sure I can save this mold. So let's have a look at some of the things that we're going to get done. So again, we're going to fix the flanges first. Right, so we're going to get the outside structure of this mold tidied up. Then we'll address the errors on the inside. All right, let's get to work.
All right, so we get going with the flanges. These are the not so easy parts. So if the getting that inner stiffening panel was easy, this was terrible. First, I had to just redesign where these flanges were going. They were never going to work the way I had it designed up before. I had no experience doing infusion. And just looking at them, I thought, this is all wrong. All right, so a little bit of flashing material here. Actually, just, you buy it at the local hardware store. It's what the Fiberglass guys suggested that I use. I used it. It worked great. It's easy to bend. It's easy to fold. Hot melt glue sticks to it nicely. There you go. So in we go with that part. And then I come back in here and cut out some of the areas where I still had some overhangs. Right, wanted to get rid of those. Then back with that same modeling clay we used before to get in there, that modeling plasticine. It's super nice to work with, but not being sloppy with how I'm putting that stuff in anymore. Being really careful with the line, making it nice. And then just 2 coats of wax. Like I didn't go crazy with the wax, no PVA, no anything. And on we go again with the gel coat. Nice thick coat of gel coat there. And then that first layer of fiberglass cloth lays in really nicely, tells me that the shape is fine, and the way we go, we seal that off with the first layer of resin, and then that kicks and everything's fine. Then I put the other hits on just while it was tacky. Like I just went at it with the chop strand mat as soon as it got tacky, and just hammered it in there. Alright,
right, so that repair pretty much done up over here. I'm going to do the same on the other fender before I finish the other repairs on this particular mold. Just to try to get them all done around the same time. Anyway, so let's flip this over and have a look at how it all turned out. Pop. That worked. And if this technique works, I'll use the same technique to repair the other side. If it doesn't work, then we'll modify, rinse, and repeat. That looks okay to me. So, sure has added a lot of stiffness to the mold, which it needed. But perfect. Finished repair. It's very smooth, really nice actually. So there'd be some repair go on in here. It's just where the glue was. That's the old mold. This is the new mold flange in here. So we'll sand this transition out and get some of this stuff tidied up, obviously. And then we'll be ready to move along to some other bits and pieces that need fixing. Problem with these molds, actually, there was insufficient stiffness this way. Right? So as you're applying the vacuum, you'd be forcing the part this way. You'll be pushing it. You're pushing on it, right? So as you're pushing on it, the fender was going to stretch. So I fixed that with a 1x4 that I've laminated on, and I'll show you how I did that.
Okay, so with boards cut, I did the same as I did on the last job, right? Took them, threw them in the vise, knocked the edges off so there wouldn't be any bridging for the pieces that are on the mold itself. And then I just hot melt glued them to the mold temporarily. And then I got my big air stapler out and showed it no mercy, just one staple. He said it'll hold that forever. Anyway, and then fiberglass the whole thing on, wrap it around the corner, and she's going nowhere. That thing's going to be in and tight, and it really did stiffen up the backside of that mold. I was super afraid that as I was going to push the vacuum onto it, it was going to stretch and my fender would be the wrong shape.
A much better transition than what that was there before. So we can nicely go then from this flange around the corner onto this flange, right? With any materials, that's going to be just fine.
Well, if you ever wanted to see what depression looks like, here we go. We start breaking it out. The finger sander is making quick work of any of these areas. So it looked pretty good at the start, and I just shred the whole thing. Like, the whole underside came out. All those areas on the top side. In the mold, there was a couple of lines. There's a few actually right around the headlight bucket area. Yeah, not happy. I already have several days in on this particular mold repair. I've never even used it once, just trying to get this thing even halfway right. There's that spot there I showed you before. It's on that front part. It's all back in and fine. And then you start working away on the inside. Well, you can't really effectively get any of the sanding tools in there. The curves are all the reverse of what they should be. So super hard to work in this stuff. And super nasty too. It's like 30 plus degrees in my garage right now. Fiberglass work is itchy. This stuff's dusty and dirty. Not saying I don't like doing this, but I don't like doing this a whole lot.
So the big problem with getting these blisters, and I've got lots of them to repair on this mold, is sometimes they're hard to see. So if you don't see them, we're going to be using a chemical release agent on these molds. It's not going to be waxed and covered in PVA and other things. We're going to use a chemical release agent. So you're going to just wipe that on, and it's extremely thin. You can't really see it. And the release is really good. So it really does allow the epoxy, and when you squish the carbon fiber parts down using an infusion, they sort of really, they're super tightly adhered to that surface. And these chemical release agents are designed to allow those parts to come off. So the biggest fear that I have anyways is I've had blisters all over these parts, and big ones, because I failed to get the right material. I should have been using fiberglass cloth. I had chopped strand mat. Anyways, I got a little bit lost in the details there. Should have been smarter, wasn't. But again, learning on the fly is hard. So what I've had to do here is go in and find each one of those blisters. The problem is there's nothing behind them. Again, they're just a void. So if that epoxy resin flows through the mold surface, imagine you've coated it with your release agent, you think you're going to get your part out, you go ahead and flood it with the epoxy under vacuum, then what's going to happen is the epoxy is going to seep in, potentially seep in through that blister and pool, and then you can get a mechanical lock. So you can get a point where the mold isn't going to release very effectively. And that's, I've actually had it happen. So, I think I've committed every mistake there is out there. So we'll try to just have no more of those as we go forward. Anyway, so what I'm using to fix the blisters, I've got my trusty finger sander, just a little cheap belt sander with a 120 grit belt. Buy the better belts, it's worth the money. So I go in, when I find them, I mark them, I grind them out. You can even feel them. If you just sort of rub your hand over the mold, you'll hear the gel coat crack. And then finally I'm filling them. In this case, I have a combination actually of, this case is from Evercoat. It's called Fiber Tech. So it's a long strand filler. It's purple of all colors. It's sort of terrible to work with, but once it hardens up, it sort of sounds like body filler, but it's got fibers in it, and it's very strong. So if you find these voids, you can coat them, and then I will be gel coating over top of that just to build the surface back up. And the gel coat gives you a nice smooth surface to extract from, and I can wet sand the molds once it's all done and get that finished. And the other product, as I've shown before and used lots, is Fiberglass. Okay, so it's in the red tin. I don't buy it in the big cans. I buy it in the small cans because I don't want to have it forever in my shop. It's green and nasty. Anyway, this is a short strand filler. Both of these fillers are waterproof. They work kind of like a regular lightweight body filler, but they're both waterproof. They're much stronger and much better for these mold repairs. Okay, so with that, about halfway done. This particular fender, I've still got the other one to do. But I tell you what, I'm going to wrap the episode here. I just don't see that there's any point in you. I can tape myself sanding. I've already taped myself sanding for about 30 hours on this. There doesn't seem to be a point in doing that anymore. You get the idea. So you're going to find your problems. You're going to address them before you go and cast your parts, try to make your mold parts. And then you're going to get much better results. So I still have to fix the flange all the way along that I was just showing you chipping out. I have to repair that, and I've got a couple more little blisters that I have to get at in both these molds. It'll still take at least a week worth of work to do it. So back at the start of the video, I told you that it probably is not worth throwing these out. I almost take it back. It's just when they're this bad, probably worth starting again. On the other fender, it wasn't as bad, so for me it was the balance between the two. So I can fix and repair most of this stuff. I hope this video has been useful for you. That's my goal. My goal is to, I've made a lot of mistakes. I remember all of them. I carry the scars. So I'm hoping that if you're finding this interesting, please subscribe, by the way, and give me a thumbs up. Everyone likes a like. Anyway, trying hard to keep bringing you good content. All right, we'll catch you on the next episode.